Good morning, and thank you for choosing to come here. There's a lot of fantastic different presentations. It's a great honor for me to be here at the Aspen Institute at the Ideas Festival, which I've never been before. Been up to the Mile High City a number of times skiing, but coming here to actually listen to great ideas is the first time. So, can we get these turned, Patty? Jamie, can you turn these lights off? Do you know how to turn these off? So, it's my job to keep you awake now for the next hour, which I'm going to try very hard to do. We can get all those lights off. There we go. We got this. I got to turn that clicker on. I spend about half of my life, quite literally, traveling around the world, looking at our planet from 38,000 feet, of sort of observing what we as humans are doing to the planet, what we have been doing, what we are doing. And it's quite phenomenal that throughout all these travels all over the world, I have the opportunity to meet incredible people, to see amazing places, and it's a real boon and a bane, frankly. Whether you're the Malacca Straits, this is the wall between Palestine and Israel, some of the dikes that we've made. It's quite fascinating to be glued to the window and to observe what our world has as a current state. And through all of this, there are three things which I have learned, which are, if you will, the thesis for this morning when we're thinking about the next 25 years. And the first thing is that change is constant. There has always been change, and there always will be change. It's this delta which we cannot stop. There are many who often like to try to freeze thinking of where we have been, where we will be in, say, the 1950s. A view of the American situation in the world, which many have, is a very 1950s view. It's not the same view that the rest of the world has of us. It's very interesting. The second is the future is fiction. It is a story which each one of us write, and we participate in that writing. Nobody truly knows what's going to happen tomorrow. We know the sun's going to come up, and we do know that. But from a geopolitical, geoeconomic, environmental standpoint, we truly don't know what the future will bring. And on one hand, this is very intimidating, but on the other hand, for me, it's very inspiring, and it's an opportunity. And the third is that participation is fundamentally what shapes our world. These might seem somewhat banal, but to me, these three things are extremely important to come back to again and again and again. Now, the company I'm with, Arup, is a large design engineering company. We have about 10,000 people, 120 offices all over the world. Most of you probably never ever heard of us. Sydney Opera House, the Bird's Nest, lots of stuff. But many of our projects take about 20 years to be finished from inception to completion. So I was the head of R&D for the company, and I started to think, well, what are we doing to think about making sure that what we're designing is not going to be a white elephant when it's done? And this is where I became very fascinated with this 20-year time frame. And so this is what we're trying to get through the whole company and do this. So participation, we've seen participation in action in the past few months. Fundamental participation to change situations. We've seen participation in other ways, participation in culture, to actually go and observe, to participate by being there, to going some other place, to be a participant in culture, not just to sit at home in a gated community. Or workshops, or events like this, participating to expand our ideas, but being fundamentally active in participating in civil society. The second future is fiction. As I said, the future is a story which each one of us writes. And I believe that, and I am very often accused of being an eternal optimist, and I am, but I believe that we can shape our future. And if we don't believe that, then we have thrown away a very important chapter. And I believe all of us are here because of this idea that we can change and shape our future. But it's very interesting for me to look back at what others thought of the future. If we look back at The City of Tomorrow by Norman Bell Geddes, we sort of created this. This looks like Singapore or Shanghai now, Chicago. This is a view from the 1950s of what tomorrow would bring. Or the French. This is what the French thought the future of city would look like, or a view from 1907. And if you look around, this is the Eiffel Tower. The Tour Eiffel is right here. And can you imagine what Paris might have looked like if this had come to pass? Or the Germans. The Germans, around the turn of the century, they imagined cities with vast roofs over them to keep out these nasty elements. So it's raining up here, and somehow, in a way that only the Germans could figure out, it's sunshine and beautiful down here. Now, how they could do that is beyond me, but maybe they could come back to it. And this is beautiful because this came from little candy wrappers, which kids got and bought, little chocolate wrappers. Or the American view of the future. This is these byways, this infrastructure, these baseball parks in the sky. And for those of you who can notice, here's the Brooklyn Bridge way down here. Most of you in the back can't even probably see that. And this is, for me, the elevator from hell, right here. I don't like heights, and man, that would just freak me. But so this is these different visions of what was to be. And you begin to work towards those visions. And I often wonder, what are our visions for our cities for tomorrow, for our world of tomorrow? You go to the top of Aspen Mountain, you look down, and look out as you're coming down on the little gondola, and you see all the houses have been built on the hills. You have to imagine another 50 years, that entire hillside just done, full of houses. If we actually be able to just look and not see anything but houses all the way down the valley. You can say, well, that will never come to pass. Well, LA was built basically from nothing to what it is, to hundreds of thousands of homes in about 30 years. So these things come to pass if you don't have a solid vision of what tomorrow could bring. Or this was online shopping from the 1950s. It's fabulous. She's talking to her twin, right? And a waistline of about 20. And this is the thing I love, these two little kids walking to school in the rain, smiling. I have two kids. They don't walk to school in the rain smiling. They walk to school, but not smiling. Or this is a vision for life in the 60s. We're all going to be living in concrete shells. How many of you live in a concrete shell? You do? Cool. Sort of a shell. Oh, high-rise. Okay, well, that's not the same thing as a real shell. And I showed this picture at a talk in Germany once, and this guy said, I live in one. I said, okay. But this is great because you have Lycra bodysuits everywhere. You have the nuclear-powered planes. You have structural something which can cantilever forever and hold a helicopter. Right? This is this vision of what was going to be. Or this crazy idea that someday you could project images onto the wall from some place. Right? This was crazy, this crazy idea. These are crazy ideas that mail would be rocket propelled into your inbox. Right? And it seems when I look at my Outlook, it is rocket propelled, no matter where you are. So these kinds of ideas about what tomorrow can bring are fundamentally important for us to participate in writing those stories. And I say this as a sort of an intro piece just to say, to encourage you to participate in that visioning, to help create those visions of what might be. Because you never know. This was from HP, this great idea that we're going to be able to print hearts. I don't know if you guys saw it. You could print organs from about 20 to about 15 years ago. I used to be at MIT, we were talking about printing things. And just at TED in February, and if anyone else was there was this guy on this dock on stage who had a kidney which he had printed. Right? The calcareous matrix was printed, and then it was embedded with stem cells. And so he has a kidney which was created, printed for a person. And then he had a young lad come on stage who had a kidney which had been made from, and it was incredible. So only 5 years ago, this was science fiction, to print a replacement part. For our children, or for my children who are now 12 and 14, that will be a possibility, if not a, quote, normality. Because I'm fortunate, as we all are, to be at the very tip of that pyramid. Right? So what does it mean? And let's leave aside all the moral questions, etc. But what does it mean now that we can print organs? And I say the future is here. That future is here. 2001 Space Odyssey. All those things, we can talk like that. The future is here. So now the question is, now what? Now what are the consequences? What are the implications? What are the opportunities, the threats for being able to print replacement parts? And I'll tell you, I will be diabetic. It's in my family. I know that. And I tell you, if I have a choice of being on a dialysis machine for hours and hours or having a kidney printed, I'm going for option 2. Absolutely. You know. So to me, the question then kind of morphs into a question of what is normal. And not just what is normal, but what will normal be? It's not in my mental map that it's normal to print organs. It wasn't until February. And I'm still trying to get my head around what that really means for normal with the healthcare debate we have, and the vast majority of the world's population has no access to healthcare at all. So how can it be normal to print organs? What's normal? And what do we want normal to be? So all of us in this room and at this conference, this event, are here because we're interested in change. We're interested in ideas. And I'm assuming that we have an idea of where we would like normal to evolve to. Otherwise, I would argue you wouldn't be here. So what is that normal that we're trying to get? And what's the role that we can or should be playing to creating a new normal? And what will that new normal look like? And if you don't have that in mind, what that new normal state might be, then I would argue we haven't really thought through that holistic picture. Right? And that's what it will come to in just a second. So those 3 things, the change is constant, future is fiction, participation, change. How many of you got to fly into Hong Kong when it was fun? Right? And I just tell you, how many of you have no clue what I'm talking about? Okay. This was the flight path. This is from the flight book of how to get into the old airport. This is the strip, the landing strip, and yes, this is the flight path. Okay? And what you would do, you'd be in big planes. You'd be like they only flew big planes into Hong Kong. You would fly at this target. And then at a certain point, you would take an 87-degree right-hand turn. Now, and this is, I lived in Hong Kong for a while, and the first time I went there, I got to sit up front. This is pre, and the pilot, talking to the pilot, he showed this to me. I go, no way. He goes, yeah, a flight to Hong Kong is 12 hours of boredom and 13 seconds of terror. and I'm going, what? It's this pilot telling me, like, but here you fly at this, you take a right-hand turn, then you're landing in between buildings. This is the way it was. You could look out your window and you could see people cooking, doing their laundry, right? I mean, right? It was intense. You'd wave at them. They never waved back, ever, right? But it was really amazing, actually, that this occurred. It was so fun. It was wonderful. And then you got out of the airport and you were in town. Right there, Hong Kong was in your face. You didn't have to take a train for another hour and a half and all that. But this change was predictable, intentional, and dependable. So when we're thinking about change, to me, we also have to kind of categorize what kind of change are we talking about. And this is one change which we know was going to happen. There was never a single accident at this airport. Very predictable. Another kind of change is this. If you go to this is from the top of one of the tallest towers in Tokyo. 3 cities. This is the view from this tall tower in Tokyo, the view from the tall tower in Chicago, view from tall tower in Shanghai, the tallest building now. 2 things with this one that's mind-blowing. Every single tower in here is 25 years old. We engineered the first tall high-rise, which was a hotel, which was only, I think, 22 stories tall. Every single tower you see in here has been built in 25 years. That's a rapid change. But if you look at all 3 of these, and if you had gone back to the city fathers, and I say fathers very consciously, the city fathers 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago for Tokyo, and said, good sirs, can you imagine one day you're going to have a city which is so large you cannot walk across it in a day? That you couldn't see the end of it. There'll be millions of people, and it'll be all made out of concrete, steel, and glass. They'd have looked at you and thought you were absolutely crazy, throwing you into the water, right? Could not have imagined that change. But this was an unintentional, very measured change, and it's a very local situation, right? Although it's happening all over the world, the great elephant in the room that very few people like to talk about is the population growth. But this is fascinating for me when we're looking at that measured local change. It just kind of happens. Another kind of change is in Arusha. I was leading a workshop on the future of eco-resorts for sub-Saharan Africa. And we got to go, we were to the national park. And if you ever have a chance to go on a safari, if you haven't done one yet, it's absolutely something to put on your bucket list in the top 10. It's truly fundamentally amazing. But we're down there, and we're on safari. This is what it is. You're standing in these jeeps, and you're looking out, and we confront these giraffe face to face. These big, gorgeous brown eyes about that big, just looking at you. It was kind of a, stare down. Who's going to blink? And eventually they did, because we're just going, shutter, watching, taking a movie. And eventually these guys meander off into the bush, and they're beautiful, beautiful, beautiful animals. And what's amazing, though, to know from the park keepers is they have now changed their migratory paths, which have developed over eons, to walk on our roads. They no longer walk their own roads. And think about it. If you had long, spindly legs like this, where would you rather walk? Walk on the path or walk through the bush? They'd rather walk on the road. And so this is what they have chosen. So this is an unintentional change as we have created these roads, and this is a road widening project. See, it's going from 1 lane to 2. It's going to be done in 3 days and not in 30 months. It's very interesting. So it's an unpredictable and unintentional but very local change. We've affected these beautiful animals forever, or at least until the roads are overgrown. Another kind of change, the last one, is I live in the Bay Area. Our headquarters are in London, so I'm one of those who contributes to global climate change very significantly. And it's amazing to me when I look down at the polar ice cap, the North Pole, and to look at the winter sea ice in the spring as it begins to thaw. And it's really quite amazing. And a few years ago, I was just standing there watching this go by, and it became visceral for me. It became this climate change, this new normal that we have to deal with, became very, very real in a very important way. And commensurate with that was a conversation I had with a friend who's a crazy guy who likes to walk to the poles. So he likes to walk to the North Pole and the South Pole. And he tried to go on a polar trek all by himself. He'd done it with groups, and he wanted to do it all by himself. He wanted to go on the same route he'd done 5 years previously, but he couldn't. He started, but that same route was now full of new ice, not old ice. Old ice has been abraded by the winds. It's like getting sandblasted. It's kind of soft and smooth. New ice is like walking on shards of glass. It is so sharp because the pressure makes it crunch up. And for him, and hearing him talk about the changes which occurred just in the past 5 years was quite fundamental. And so this was a change. It's very unpredicted, unintentional, and global. We didn't intend to do this in the 1700s, but it's a new normal that we have to deal with. And I had to add this in. I added this in this morning. This is from a recent trip. Every cloud you see there is a contrail. Every single white bit is from the back end of a jet. Unbelievable when you look at the effects of contrails and creating shadows on the planet. It's really amazing to me. Ooh. Now my rule usually is that you're at the bar tonight. Don't look at me, mine wouldn't mind. And you buy for the bar, right? That's my rule usually at things. But. Well, I think the drinks are free, so. That's all right. So here, change is constant. There's always different kinds of change, but the context of change is very, very variable. And this is one of the things that for me is so important. I could say as a contextualist, I think it's absolutely crucial that we understand the context of change, the context of success, and trying to understand the cultural, the economic, really looking at the holistic view of context, which is why I started this program within about 8 years ago, trying to understand by asking people what they thought was driving change for them. And I ordered that according to STEEP, and for those of you who do scenarios, you're very familiar to that, but sometimes there's legal on the end of that, steeple. But I find in most conversations that we have or are had around decisions, do not talk about all 5 of these. This is not just good for scenarios, but it's good for decisions that we're trying to make about the future. So when I first started, I left MIT as a professor, and I came to the company. All I really wanted to talk about was the technology, the environment, and social, in that order. That was my thing, right? And then it was very interesting. I talked to Lorna, who was head of sustainability for us at that time, a South African woman, an amazing person, and she said, Chris, I want to take you to see these politicians down at Whitehall, because I was living in London then. And I go, look, politics, ugh, right? Yeah, no. And she looked at me with this complete despair of like, don't you get it? And now I get it. If you're not part of the political game where you're helping to change the rules, all the rest of these things, it's just sort of false. So you have to play with all of them. And this is where I created these cards, and all of you should have gotten a couple of cards when we came in. And these cards that you have are the results of workshops with about 15,000 people around the world, asking very, in an organized workshop way, what do you think is driving change? And then sort of why. And we boiled those down into the cards which we published in 2006, which you have there. And then we went on to look at the top 6 issues that came up in every workshop all over the world, whether it was in Soweto, in Sydney, in Los Angeles, or, it doesn't matter. And 6 things came up everywhere. Climate change, urbanization, demographic change, waste, water, and energy. Those are always in the top 5 of people's concerns what was driving change. And so we went on to try to research that a little bit more and say what was meant by that. And so we created these, we had a researcher for each one of them, put together these cards, which are then these topical card sets, also broken down into steep. And that's what these drivers of change cards are. Now you have them, and I want to pop the lights on for just a second. Josh, can you turn the lights on for a second? So I want you to grab the cards. Oh, wow. Wake up. I want you to take a look at the card. And I just want to give you very briefly the anatomy of the card. Because I used to be, I'm a recovering academic, so I'm a 4th generation educator. And one of the things that I find is really important is to understand how to access people. And different people access content differently. And we use the cards differently. Some are attracted to images immediately. Some are attracted to clever sayings. Some are attracted to graphs. Some are attracted to actually the content. What is it about? So each card has it as this top sort of rhetorical question. And those rhetorical questions are for conversation starters. And then there's an image. And this card set, every image was given to us by individuals from Flickr. Right? So they're all we chose them, they gave them to us. At the bottom right, you'll see this little factoid, which is supposed to make you really clever in the bar or talking to your boss, so you can say to someone in conversation, did you know? With some sort of, and I absolutely subjugated the issue to the bottom left because I wanted people to get into the cards first. And then there's the graph over here, some kind of graph typically. And what we do with those, we try to say, so how is this going to impact you? And I always like to think of like the skin of an onion, from yourself as a person, your family, your local community, your business community, your country, your region. And so you try to think, now I'm going to ask a question now. Who has a card where they think there's an issue which is kind of irrelevant for driving change for the next 10 years? Irrelevant to you. I'll just say irrelevant to you. Does anyone have a card which they think is irrelevant to you? You have a card you don't understand. Well, that's fair too. RFID tags. Have you eaten your radio frequency ID tags? Because who knows what an RFID tag is? Who could give a really quick description?
Get you through the ski lift.
Get you through the ski lift. So there's little tags you have in your cars. There you go. I knew you could do it in a really quick way. You buy your gasoline that way. You can. With mobile phone? Yeah. With mobile? A mobile gas station has a little RFID tagged card? Okay. Okay. Yeah. So so that's, you got to kind of get the picture. Okay. I asked the same question at Berkeley. I was doing a workshop with some students, and this very brave woman put her hand up and said, sea level rise. It's irrelevant because we can just go to the hills. Right? And it was great because all of her fellow students, all of her people were like, what? You know, you could just see this scorn on their faces. And this poor woman just kind of shrank, you know, like, but it was a beautiful gut reaction, right? Because this is important. We don't think about these things too much, but kind of gut react to things. And I said, well, explain what you mean. She goes, well, as the bay rises, we will be able to retreat into the hills, because San Francisco Bay, there are lots of hills around. And that was her quick mental process. And then we said, well, and it was the same reaction. I did a workshop in Minnesota to a business group, about 300 people in the audience, and a gentleman said the same thing. He said, sea level rise. And I said, really? I said, why? He said, look, we're in Minnesota. It's not going to hit me. And I asked him, I said, so what do you do? He said, I make so-and-so and so-and-so. I said, that's great. So where's your stuff produced? He goes, well, it's in China. I said, it's probably in Guangzhou. Yeah, probably. And it's probably shipped across the ocean. I said, probably. He said, well, you know there are only 5 ports in the world which are ready for a 1 meter sea rise. If it rises a meter, then we only have 5 ports left that are currently capable to deal with any kind of shipping. He just kind of looked at me and said, well, and what happens if, you know, he actually made lawnmowers. So what happens if, you know, half of Florida's underwater and, well, it says, no one's going to buy your lawnmower anymore. And so he kind of got it and saying, well, actually, maybe that is going to impact me. But I do that not to embarrass him, but to say most of these issues we're trying to get one to think outside of their normal cognitive zone. And who has one that they think is really going to impact them tremendously? Who has one? What's yours?
Mine says that natural food will be illegal, and so food that is just naturally grown will be illegal.
What's the topic on the bottom?
They're talking about the EU banning items that are not on a particular list, and a lot of natural foods are not on the list, and so they will be banned.
Right, so it comes to some of the, like there's some cheeses, which I love cheese, which cannot be transferred across borders because they don't follow many procedural. The same thing we have in this country. There are many foods which our grandparents ate, which are no longer able to be purchased because they don't fulfill or pass any of the requirements for sanitation and the things like that. So it's interesting to think of what could be banned, what could we not have in the next 15, 20 years. So you get the point. Get the point with the cards. So the cards are, so there we go, and keep going. So the reason I use these cards, and kill the lights again, is this. This is essentially, when I say this is encapsulates my job and the way I see it. We all know Winnie the Pooh. Here's Edward the Bear coming downstairs, bump, bump, bump on the back of his head. Behind Christopher Robin, it is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs, but sometimes he feels that there really is another way of coming downstairs if he could just stop bumping for a moment and think of it. Now, I would posit that all of us get really good at bumping downstairs. And at least in my world we do. And it's very hard to find a way to stop bumping. In an organized way to think, could we and how should we be doing things differently? And this idea cell is a fabulous way to do that. Here we have 3 days, some for a whole week, just to stop and think, which is a luxury for us. But to me, this is really important. This is where we use the cards, is to try to help people stop and think. So I'm going to talk about a couple of issues here, and I want you to think about how they might play out for you over the next, say, 10, 20 years. So these are all the issues in the 2006 cards set, and you just have a few of them here. So aging population is one. And it's quite interesting when we think about aging population. We are an aging nation. This is how many of you are familiar with population pyramids? Good, about half. So this is homework to go and look up population pyramids. These are bands of ages 0 to 4, 5 to 9, all the way up to 100 plus. And the left-hand side in this case are boys. No, I can't recall. I think this is boys and girls. I have to look at the next one. But this is China. And this is China from 1950 to 2050. And we're looking at the bands as it goes over time. Of course, there's your projections into the future. These are boys and girls, I think. Doesn't matter. But if you look at 1950, and you look at the shape of the pyramid, what this means is, at that time, it was a very young population. Look at where it is today. It's sort of this bulge in the middle, and it goes up towards the fast, and then all of a sudden, it's almost like this big straight line, right? Because interesting. Now, this is a young population, and I mean absolutely no disrespect Chinese culture at all. But if you have to imagine, if you don't have, when you only have a few elders, if you look at 1950 and earlier, when you only have a few elders, it's really easy to respect them. Right? Because there aren't that many around. But with time, you can see there are going to be more and more and more. So you begin to have, which we're seeing already, is beginning to have like some cultural challenges as to how you deal with that. If you take a look at Denmark, this is the same kind of thing for Denmark, but I don't have the same backwards history, but looking forward, you see it's a different bulge. And Denmark already has this huge bulge in the middle for right now going forward. But in the end state is seemingly pretty close to being the same. Then you take a look at Mexico. Mexico's kind of like, it's a very young country. Now, when you think of what that means, if you're a young country, you need jobs. You need jobs. You need things for these kids to do, these young people to do. And as you get older, then you have to think of, so who's going to be taking care of all these? There's a thing called the dependency ratio of how many people are working, right, versus how many people are depending on them. So you have all these folks down here who are depending on folks in here, and all these folks up here who are depending on these folks in here for their livelihoods, for food and for everything else. So if you look at, this is Denmark put in the proper perspective to Mexico, because this gives you also the absolute magnitude. And then if you put Denmark, this is for fun, I was picking on Denmark, sorry about that. Anyone here is Danish or Danish descent? This is Denmark relative to China, right? And this is actually exaggerated. PowerPoint would not let me make that any smaller. So it should be almost half that size. So you begin to get an idea of the absolute magnitude of populations and the impact that has. Now, what's fascinating to me is there are two. I'll show you two more. One is South Korea. This is South Korea in 1995, and this is South Korea anticipated in 2050. That blows my mind. I just got this last week. I was in South Korea last week, and this really blows my mind. You have to imagine this doesn't work, actually. This doesn't work. So who's going to be making up all the potential for work? Who's going to be changing the bed sheets? Who's going to be working in the hospitals, in the restaurants? It's a really interesting issue, which is why in this country, why we have such the immigration, because you need young people. You need youth to do the work which I don't want to do anymore. So, and so here you see the population from the 25, and this is this bulge in the middle. So that's an interesting one. And then here's two, I'll just show you at the last. This is the United States, projected to 2050. It's called a beehive, right? Where we still will have this pretty nice, healthy bulge. One of the big debates is what percentage of this will be immigration and what not. And when you look at a country like Italy or Korea, which is not producing enough people to replace itself, you need to have 2.1 kids per family in order to have replacements, because you lose 0.1 by accidents, but you need to replace. And they're not making enough babies in Korea, and then you end up with that kind of thing before. This is Botswana. You see Botswana would be predicted to have a similar beehive type of shape, but as you can see here, this is with and without AIDS. So this would be without AIDS, and this is with the anticipated change with AIDS. And look, so these are all your productive folks, right? 35 up to 60. And look at this, the vacuum which is being created. And so this is when I'm looking at these, I find when looking ahead, you can begin to imagine the kinds of services which will be required, the kinds of tax breaks you have or you don't have. And they have population pyramids for every county in the United States. And it's really quite interesting to look at those so you can get an idea of where you need schools and where you don't. So that was this thing. The other thing is interesting. Yeah. Or India, I do on my laptop, but I don't here. Yes, they are. It's a very good point. It's a substantial drop in the population, similar to South Korea's, like where there's a very big drop.
So what's the website for looking at this?
So the best I would suggest to you is just Google, or whatever your browser preference is, just population pyramids. And I just saw a new site that came up but unfortunately you can't download the images very easily, which I thought was very clever. It lists A to Z, every country in the world, and it all comes out of census data. And A to Z, sorry. And also by year, from 1950 to 2050. So you can do that. Yes, sir?
Well, Turkey has a lot of young people, and they say that's wonderful to support all the old people. But what if they don't have any jobs?
Yeah. So
what do they say about that?
So the question is, Turkey says they have a lot of young people to support the old people, but what about the jobs? This is a challenge which if we look around the world, if you look at this population pyramid, those nations which have this lack of employment are those where we could say there's a little bit walking on marbles a little bit. Right? It is a challenge for us nationally and internationally as well. If you look at Indonesia next to Australia, Indonesia is an extremely young nation. I'll come to that. Extremely young nation. Australia is an aging nation. Australia is under sort of a situation where they're looking at, they need to have immigrants, right? But they're having a hard time with their own national identity with allowing immigrants, the right kinds of immigrants to come in to do the work. I just said. So you very often are next to each other. I'm going to keep going because I'm going to run out of time. The next, I want to, single-person households is with this the demographic change is a huge change. It's all over the world. Doesn't matter where it is. It's fascinating to me how that is evolving, whether in Shanghai or Singapore or here in the nation. And I'm going to breeze through this really quickly. I just had to do something recently for thinking about what is the world of a 22-year-old? And what is their expectation of normal? What's the context of normal for them? Thinking about the next 25 years, and these are individuals who are hopefully entering the workforce right now. Not all of them are. And what is their world compared to ours? They've never known hand-drawn cartoons. All cartoons have always been on the computer. The Simpsons has always been around. That wasn't new. It's always been there. Baywatch and the Ford Group created supermodels. So in their lives, they've always had Baywatch and supermodels. Now, gay marriage has always been a part of international reality for them. AIDS has always been a part of their reality. This what Ronald Reagan and Lady Thatcher, that's when they were in power when they were born. Was that 2 minutes? Yeah, thank you. The Berlin Wall has never existed for them, right? That was there the day after it came down. Russia, the Soviet Union, has never existed for them. James Bond has no meaning. The euro has always existed. They have never known the mark, the lira, the franc. Digital currency has always existed. 22 years ago in New Zealand were the first swipe cards. So they didn't know, I missed that one. Tiananmen Square happened about 22 years ago when the tanks went in and the Russians went out of Afghanistan, right? They left. Come on, what's going on? The Dalai Lama won the Nobel Peace Prize. They have always had cell phones. Mobile telephony is not new. It's not technology for these guys. This is just normal for 20-year-olds and more. This was the world's lightest phone when it came out. They've always known online computing. They've always known laptops. They've always had laptops of some sort. This is not new. I remember when I had my first, I still have it, my big Apple thing that weighs about 30 pounds, right? I still have that thing. It doesn't look like that. They have never seen a floppy disk except in a museum, right? Do you guys remember when you bought them by boxes and boxes of them, right? This is not part of their world. Memory has essentially been free for the 20-year-olds and going forward for the next 20 years. The genome has always been mapped. We've always had stealth bombers. There's always been a bullet train. And the French got that bullet train going, right? Almost 300 miles an hour. Ivory has always been banned. You've never been allowed to ban as aerosols. And there have always been crop circles in England. Right? So this is the world of the 22-year-old. All these things were not new for them. the Jolly Green Giant was Trek, right? It's not from Del Monte, or I can't remember. Right? It's a very different world. So when we think about that, I would argue that when we're thinking about normal in the next 20 years, we have a big task. And it'd be really good, and I have to do this, because I actually had one of my research assistants and my PA put that together, because they're both in their 20s. And I realized, even though I think I'm fairly open, I don't know enough about their world, what they think is normal. You know, they're multiple, I understand multiple threadings of communities, etc., but how they live their lives and their expectations for success is very different than ours. Very different, right? And we're the decision makers, and they're going to get stuck with what we decide what that will normal be. So this is very important for me. Another one is connectivity. And most of the time when we think about connectivity, we are the most connected world now. But are we really? Because to me, there's another layer to connectivity, which is interpersonal exchange, or in this case, I say transgenerational exchange. We learn who we are by the stories we heard from our grandparents, our aunts, our uncles, about crazy Ed, right? This is what kind of helped us figure out who we are in this sort of matrix of the world. And I get very often concerned when we don't have that transferal, you know, because I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I saw my grandparents every month, whether I liked it or not. Right? My kids have grown up in England. They saw their grandparents twice a year, whether they liked it or not. Wow. We're going to be drinking a lot tonight. Yeah, that's right. So anyways, there we go. So this is my son a few years ago. This is about connectivity. Okay. Okay, there you go. It's not me, really, it's not me. This is my son, and this is with iChat. Now I use Skype, but I try to Skype with him and my daughter every day. And it's very interesting because this was about 3 years ago. And I was at a conference called Pop Tech, and I was about ready to speak, and I was listening to this woman who's getting ready with some Tibetan bells, clinging these bells. I thought they were so beautiful, and it was just the right time to catch George after school. And so I Skytimed, and I called him up, and I said, George, you got to listen to this. And I turned the camera, this is the camera somewhere up there, that's the camera right there. Turn the camera so you could watch Boone and her Tibetan bells. And then this little voice, about 2 minutes later, he goes, Papa? There you go. I said, George, isn't that cool? He goes, Papa, can I go play now? Right? Because he didn't want to listen to Tibetan bell music. I was like, no, because he's there with his friend. He wanted to go play soccer. And I said, cool, that's great. But it was very interesting because to me as a father, I'm gone half the time. I'm never there, if you will. And I wanted to share my life with him. And I can do that now. We can do that by Skyping. We can take photos. But that was 2001 Space Odyssey. That was the future. And it's interesting to me that important aspect of connectivity, being able to connect, was important for me or for him or for her, how we enable these nomadic lifestyles to create that person-to-person connection that we so desperately need as humans. We desire, and it's something we should be doing. This is Singapore City Hall, 3 young ladies with their 3 laptops open on the City Hall steps. They're for an opening of something, and they're just sitting there chatting at midnight. Now, how many of you live in a place where 3 young women in their teens, 20s could sit at the City Hall with laptops and feel safe? Right? Good. I am so glad to see a few hands and heads nod, because the vast majority of our country, that's not the case, right? And it's interesting when we talk about freedom and what it means and safety, etc. These kids, I talk about kids, they're clickazins. They're clickazins. They learn by clicking. I'm a flipazin. I learned by flipping. My life was flipping. I collect old books. I love the smell of them, the touch of them. I have a contest with my daughter every once in a while. She has French vocabulary, and I say, okay, we're going to have a race. And so she gets on the computer, goes to whatever she does, she turns it on, boing. I go reach above her head, grab the dictionary, and flip open to the word. I always win, but she always clicks. She will not use the book. And it's beyond me, actually. But that is not part of her world. So they are clickazins. And to understand the clickazin and their fantasy, because since I'm gone, I showed this picture to her. I showed not this presentation, to my daughter a while ago, and she says, so Papa, when you shake someone's hand, how do you make sure you don't dial the wrong number? I was like, for her, this is possible. For me, it's just pain. I can't imagine it, but she could. So it's really fascinating to me. The immediacy, there's connectivity, connected homes. How many of you have used a toilet in Japan? Right? It will wash and dry your backside at the same time. The toilets can also do a urinalysis and a stool analysis for you, if you so choose. This is actually a health suite where it will do that for you. And it's quite phenomenal because Japan is a nation who is aging, and cleanliness and their health is very personal and very important. And so to be able to have a toilet to do a urinalysis for you is pretty amazing, frankly. Right? I'm waiting for a hotel group to do that. And I will be loyal to that hotel chain for the rest of my life, because since I travel so much. But it's interesting. So the homes are now connected. They are aware of you. They can be aware of you, what you need. Buildings are the same way. You know, we're tracked. If you have a cell phone, we're tracked by our government and others. We're known where we are at all times. And so you can actually use that in buildings to understand what's going on, where you are, what you need. This is an example in Australia where they're actually tracked, so you can say, it knows where you need to go to your Outlook meeting, and it says, okay, you need to leave now. Right? If you want to walk, you leave now. And if you want to take a taxi, you've got to really leave now. Right? And so it's really interesting how that can help you with this connectivity. Or connected cultures. Again, this is South Korea. In a taxi, you can pay 4 ways. But most fascinating for me is, if you go to South Korea, the guy's watching his soap opera while he's driving, right? Because they get 4G. You can watch TV in the subway, underground. I go from San Francisco to where I live up in Marin, and my telephone signal drops twice, right? And who's connected? Who's going to win, if you will quote win, right? So, and then you go down into the subway. You can pay for your sugar, fat, and whatever in 4 different ways. You can pay with your phone, with your transit card, with cash, and a credit card. You get off a taxi in London, and you try to find a taxi you can pay cash. Easy. Try to find a taxi, pay a credit card. Impossible. Right? Sorry, cash only, mate. Again, who's actually focused on what is going to work for the next future? So the question is, what's normal? What will normal be? And I've got only 7 minutes. I'm going to give you 2 of these stories. And this first one is my personal story. My grandfather was an inventor. He created the clay trap. If you do trap and skeet shooting, he created the Trias trap. And so I grew up in the family business. And I was in Cincinnati. This is about 3 years ago again. The day after the trucks came to take all the press brakes and all the machines away that had made those machines for 50 years or something. Because my dad had to sell the business because that business is in massive decline. He's older. My brother and I, neither of us were interested in taking on the family business. So he sold it on to, I can't remember exactly who. But it's interesting to get there. So this is where I had my first job. Press brake, on an assembly line, if you will. The smell of oil, all these things fresh in my mind. Classic middle class. I never needed anything. I wanted lots of things. I never needed a thing. Okay? And it was very interesting to me to think of, what does it mean now for us in our world for the next generations? Right? My father was there every day. He left at 4 o'clock in the morning to the plant, but he was there when I came home every day. I'm gone half the time. We saw grandparents all the time. So what's a better life? We're trying to give our kids a better life. So we're looking ahead at the next 20, 25 years. What is that better life? What does that mean, really? And what will that normal be for them? And then sometimes I get kind of wound up about that when I think about my kids. And there's my dad looking at what was his life. And it's gone. Never to be reenacted. But that middle class, that huge middle class, which gave us what we've had, is growing in other places. And we sort of lost this making stuff at a very local level There's this joy of making, of creating. I think this is something we've got to get back somehow. This is a really fun one. I'm looking out the window from the lounge of my hotel in Sao Paulo, and I'm looking at this digger paddling its way up the river. You can see this is a scoop, one of those big snorkel scoops, and it's paddling up the river. You don't do that with a digger, right? This is not normal, right? It's not normal. But when you're in a developing world, there is no such thing as normal. Normal is you make do with what you've got,